It is the early morning of the 2nd of April 1942, and a desperate battle is taking place on the freezing northern waters of the Arctic Ocean. At its centre sits the light cruiser HMS Edinburgh, a ship that was only hours previously one of the British Royal Navy's most advanced and modern warships. Now, 2 consecutive torpedo hits have opened a gaping hole in her starboard side and almost torn off her stern. Barely able to move and sitting low in the water, her electrical systems have failed and she's unable to steer. The only hope of saving the ship is to reach the relative safety of the Soviet-held port of Murmansk, still some 200 miles away. Overhead, Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes circle like vultures. Torpedo bombers and submarines harry them constantly, and a thick trail of oil is flowing from the wounded cruiser. Blood is in the water, and now far more dangerous predators are closing in. Picking up the trail of the injured Edinburgh is the Hermann Schumann, the Z-24 and the Z-25, 3 large and powerful destroyers of the German Kriegsmarine who intend to eliminate the British cruiser and anything that stands in their way. Between them lies the Edinburgh's small escort, made up of just 2 destroyers, the Foresight and the Forester, as well as 4 small Halcyon-class minesweepers. But despite this numerical superiority, they are desperately outgunned. The Schumann carries 5 5-inch guns, but the newer Z-24 and Z-25 between them wield 10 large 5.9-inch guns. All that the smaller British destroyers can bring to bear are their 4.7-inch guns, and for the tiny minesweepers, each only carries a pair of aging 4-inch guns. The Edinburgh, meanwhile, is armed to the teeth, but most of her guns and state-of-the-art targeting computers are inoperable, and unable to move or manoeuvre at any speed, her defensive and offensive capabilities are severely limited. For the captains on board the approaching German destroyers, they outgun and outrange the vulnerable group of British ships, and the outcome seems clear. Hi, sorry, Calm in the edit bay here. I just realised I made a mistake. I said that the Z-24 and Z-25 between them wielded 10 5.9-inch guns, but they actually wielded 8. They had 4 single-mounted 5.9-inch guns to each ship. It was the Hermann Schumann that had 5 5-inch guns. Sorry if I made that more confusing. But while I've got you here, today's video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN, the wonderful company that lets you keep your online identity safe, but also gives you a lot more freedom when you're browsing the internet. Now, I've been using Surfshark since around 2019. It's when I first started researching my Kharkovchanka video, and I was browsing a lot of very old and janky Ukrainian and Russian websites looking for history on these amazing vehicles, and I wanted something that would keep me safe while I was on these websites, but also to allow me to access country-specific websites that I couldn't get to with my UK-based IP address. Researching my videos takes a lot of time and effort and takes me all across the internet, all across the world if you will, and being able to access different locations through Surfshark VPN to allow me access to country-specific content and videos and the like is essential. I know how much you guys appreciate my deep dives and exhaustive research into topics, and Surfshark helps make that possible. What's more, Surfshark's Clean Web feature by far is the best out there for blocking ads, trackers, malware, phishing attempts, and a lot. Now, if you've watched my previous videos, you'll also know that it not only now takes me all across the internet, but all across the world, from the deserts of Yuma to Norwegian fortresses, and Surfshark has been my constant companion, as well as my wife, letting me keep my location based back at home so I can't lose access to the content that I want. So check out my link in the description below and use code CALUM to get 3 months absolutely free. Surfshark also do 30-day money-back guarantees, so you really don't have anything to lose. Anyway, thanks again for the support, Surfshark, and let's get back to the HMS Edinburgh and the Z-24 and Z-25, which have, as I remind you, 8 5.9-inch guns. At around 6:30 in the morning, the minesweeper Hussar spots the 3 ships ominously emerging from the mist. Despite her small size and lack of firepower, she immediately opens fire on the approaching German destroyers. By now, the Foresight and Forester, heeling hard round to face the enemy, slam their engines full ahead and charge forward, guns blazing. The British well know that their best chance of defence is attack, and outgunned or not, they intend to do just that. The smaller minesweepers stay close to the Edinburgh, which circles to port attempting to make as much speed as possible. While her A and B turrets are functional, there is no electrical power to move the turrets or operate the firing director. Turret officer Lieutenant Robert Howe must hang head and shoulders out of a hatch on the turret itself and shout directions to his crew inside. Suddenly he spots the Herman Schumann about 2 miles away, emerging from a bank of snow cloud, and shouts down the order to fire. Incredibly, the shells find their target, slamming into the Schumann's engine rooms and instantly causing fires and chaos on board. As the ship drifts to a stop, the entire battle has now changed. It's clear to the Germans the Edinburgh is not yet dead, and her escorts, now engaged in a fight for their lives, are not going to give up. The Forester, charging towards the partially obscured ships in the cloud banks ahead, launches torpedoes, but with little success. Moments later, a series of 5.9-inch shells crash into her, smashing her boiler rooms and killing scores of men. Yet more hits knock out her guns and kill her captain, Lieutenant Commander George Huddard. The ships are now engaged at almost point-blank distances, separated from the enemy by only a few thousand yards, and the Foresight, seeing her sister in trouble, valiantly races between the damaged destroyer and the incoming fire, but is soon similarly smashed by shells to her boiler room and guns. As the two ships desperately attempt to cover each other and make repairs, the Foresight's crew suddenly spots the distinctive trail of torpedoes, but racing under them and heading straight for the Edinburgh. The Edinburgh is still moving slowly in an attempt to evade the incoming attacks, but not fast enough. One of the torpedoes launched from the Z-24 strikes her amidships, this time on the port side, almost exactly opposite of her previous hit. The huge cruiser is now practically open from port to starboard, and what hopes there is of getting her to safety has been all but dashed. The Edinburgh, Foresight and Forester are now all but dead in the water, unable to move and with only a couple of guns between them still in action. Worse still, the Z-24 and Z-25 are almost entirely unharmed and in a prime position to now destroy each ship one by one. Just as the end seems nigh, however, to the amazement of the British, the two German destroyers begin to withdraw. Unwilling to risk more losses and having saved hundreds from the rapidly sinking wreckage of the Herman Schumann, the Z-24 and Z-25 retreat back into the mist. Incredibly, the sheer tenacity of the defence put up by the small destroyers and minesweepers have driven off a far more powerful foe and sunk one of the Kriegsmarine's precious few destroyers. For the Edinburgh, however, the outlook is bleak. Her officers fear she may break in two at any moment, and the order is given to abandon ship. Her crew, as well as the hundreds of injured sailors and passengers still on board, are now precariously evacuated onto the escorting ships and now watch to wait for the Edinburgh to go under. However, amazingly, the ship still refuses to sink. Her escorts attempt to speed up her demise with armour-piercing shells and depth charges, but neither seem to fatally damage the battered and stubborn cruiser. Finally, the Foresight sends one of her few remaining torpedoes into the wounded Edinburgh. Incredibly, even after this, the fourth torpedo to hit the ship, it would be a long, slow few moments before the Edinburgh finally heeled over and sank. It was a sad end for a tough and stubborn ship that had come, in the eyes of her crew, so close to surviving the fight. On board the Edinburgh, as she plunged under the Arctic Ocean, were the 57 bodies of men who had died over the course of the last 2 days, but also something else, something far more unusual, and something that many of the crew only a few days before had fatefully warned may curse the Edinburgh on this voyage. In a heavily armoured room deep within the bowels of the ship and close to where the first torpedo had hit were boxes upon boxes of gold, stamped with the markings of the Soviet Union. Now, the Edinburgh was pulling them down to her watery grave, and a new story was about to unfold of a relentless pursuit to find and reclaim the lost Soviet gold hidden within the wreck of HMS Edinburgh. Four days earlier, near the freezing, war-ravaged harbour of Murmansk, the crew of the HMS Edinburgh watched as an unusual cargo of rough wooden boxes were loaded onto the 10,000-ton cruiser under the watchful eye of armed Soviet guards and a contingent of Royal Marines. As the small boxes were lowered down 3 decks below into the armoured bomb room, one suddenly slipped and fell upon the open deck, breaking open to reveal the contents, ingots of bright, shiny gold. This gold, which had been perilously transported almost 1,000 miles to Murmansk from Moscow, was a partial payment from the Soviets to the United States of America for the millions of dollars worth of arms and equipment they so desperately needed to help fight back against the German invasion of the Soviet Union. Delivering said arms and equipment would prove difficult, with few easy routes available to move the vast volumes of trucks, tanks, planes, ammunition and aid that the Soviets required. One of the shortest routes was via the remote northern port of Murmansk, where Winston Churchill had promised Joseph Stalin that the British Empire would be able to continuously supply with regular monthly convoys leaving from Great Britain and the recently occupied Iceland. These convoys would become a vital lifeline to the Soviets, but an unbelievably treacherous and deadly endeavour for the Royal Navy and the hundreds of merchant vessels and crews tasked with transporting the supplies. The route itself would be over some of the most tempestuous stretches of sea in the world. In winter, the convoys would have to deal with navigating in near constant darkness, constrained by the vast stretches of ice, constant storms and plunging temperatures that could freeze ships and their crews solid. The summer was little better, but worst of all, the perpetual daylight made the convoys sitting ducks from the Luftwaffe, who enjoyed near total air supremacy across the entire route, packs of U-boats stalking them at every turn, and surface ships of the German Kriegsmarine that lay in wait amongst the Norwegian fjords.
This is the Roof of the World route, which saw an Arctic sea battle between Nazi bombers, mine layers, packs of torpedo droppers and submarines, and the strong escort of ships and planes which screened the great armada of freighters taking their precious cargoes to the relief of Russia. For about a week, the savage enemy assault went on in an attempt to wipe out the staggering tonnage of weapons and supplies, which even the Germans described as enough to equip an army.
By May 1942, 15 convoys had made the perilous journey to Murmansk, with a total of 152 merchant vessels successfully arriving to offload their cargo. Accompanying each convoy were a varied array of Royal Navy escorts drawn from the British Home Fleet. Minesweepers to scout and screen for minefields, armed trawlers, corvettes and destroyers for anti-submarine warfare, as well as cruisers and large battleships to counter the threat of German surface ships and aircraft. One such cruiser assigned to the Murmansk run, as it was known, was HMS Edinburgh, a town-class light cruiser built by Swan Hunter in Newcastle and launched in 1938, coming into service that following year. The Edinburgh, along with her sister, HMS Belfast, were enlarged and improved versions of the previous town-class cruisers, being longer with extra range, better armour and more extensive anti-aircraft capabilities. Her main battery consisted of 12 6-inch guns, a secondary battery of 12 4-inch guns, as well as a wide variety of smaller armaments and triple-mounted torpedo launchers, one located on either side of the ship. Perhaps most impressively of all, however, lay deep within the heart of the cruiser, where state-of-the-art targeting computers, fed by rangefinders and the latest radar systems of the day, gave her an impressive and advanced degree of targeting capabilities for the time. With a top speed of over 32 knots, like many light cruisers, the Edinburgh was designed for speed over armour, but she was nonetheless heavily armoured for her class, with 4.8 inches of thick armour on her main belt and protection for her decks, bulkheads and turrets. A tough, capable and modern ship, the Edinburgh had seen relentless service since her commissioning amid the outbreak of the war. Her officers and crew were highly experienced and well trained, and her presence in the Arctic was a relief to many of the merchant ships and escort vessels who were relying on her as a counter for both aircraft and the threat of Kriegsmarine destroyers or battleships. Having escorted the ships of PQ-14 from Britain to Murmansk, on the 28th of April, the Edinburgh was now ready to lead the returning convoy, QP-11, back home to Iceland. Along with her complement of over 550 men, over 200 passengers, mainly casualties and merchant seamen whose ships had been sunk in previous convoys, were also on board. Also leaving with the Edinburgh was Rear Admiral Stuart Bonham Carter, who took the Edinburgh as his flagship for the return journey home. Perhaps most crucially of all, however, locked away and secured in the bomb room, packed 5 to a box, were 465 gold ingots. The crew had been suspicious the moment the gold had arrived. Rumours had spread like wildfire that it was Polish gold, pillaged and ransacked from the Soviet invasion of the country in 1939. To the suspicious sailors, it was an ominous sign. Chief Petty Officer Reginald Levick was one of the crew in charge of packing the boxes into the bomb room. Levick would later recall what he saw. I told Commander Jeffreys that it was going to be a bad trip. There was one really bad omen. Water streamed in red rivulets off the decks from those Russian cases. It was only stained from the crimson stenciling on each case, but we were suspicious and apprehensive. I thought to myself, Russian gold dripping with blood. Leaving the besieged Murmansk, the Edinburgh led QP-11 out from the Kola Inlet and into the unpredictable Arctic seas. Quite quickly, however, repeated encounters with U-boats set the convoy on edge. The Edinburgh in particular was a valuable target to any U-boat, and as a result, Admiral Bonham Carter ordered her to speed ahead of the slow-moving convoy, setting an erratic course to help throw off any potential attacks. However, now some 15 miles ahead of the convoy and without the protective screen of anti-submarine escorts, the Edinburgh was more exposed than ever, and watching the ship plough through the freezing Arctic waters unprotected was the U-456. At the helm of this Type 7C U-boat was Captain Lieutenant Max Tichat. He had on board the submarine only 3 torpedoes, but he intended to make them count. Sighting the large ship in his periscope, Tichat estimated his range at 1,000 metres and the cruiser's speed at around 15 knots. It was 4:18 p.m. on the 30th of April 1942, and expertly timing his shot to coincide with the Edinburgh's changing of course, he launched the torpedoes. On board the Edinburgh, officers on the bridge quickly spotted the trail of torpedoes, but there was little that could be done in time. The first slammed amidships, opening a massive hole in the starboard side, only metres from the bomb room and where the precious gold bullion was stored. The second struck aft, causing an explosion so huge that it peeled back the rear deck like a tin opener and obliterated the rear section of the ship. The Edinburgh bucked wildly and men were thrown off their feet or out of their bunks. Scores were injured or dead and many were doomed to flooded compartments or sections closed off by watertight doors. The well-drilled crew were soon able to restore power, lock watertight doors and cut away the ruined sections of the stern that were dragging the ship down. While both the captain and crew felt confident that the Edinburgh could live to fight another day, it was not to be. Not even 12 hours later, at around 3 in the morning on the 1st of May, the Z-23, Z-24 and Hermann Schumann slipped out of their Norwegian base, intent with finishing the job that U-456 had started. By the early hours of the 2nd of May, having taken the Hermann Schumann with her, the Edinburgh slipped under the waves. The gold, too, was gone, as no attempt had been made to recover it during the chaos of the battle. In his dispatches and after-action reports, Admiral Bonham Carter, when asked about the status of the gold, tersely responded that the gold was in a compartment that was flooded by the first torpedo. Now, sitting at a depth of over 800 feet in the remote Arctic Sea, the Edinburgh lay far beyond any salvage recovery technology of the day, and whether the gold remained within her or was now scattered on the seabed as a result of the torpedo damage and sinking would be impossible to assess. So the Edinburgh was gone, but of course the sinking of the Edinburgh by the end of the Second World War had become a footnote amid the innumerable losses racked up by the Royal Navy and the Allies in general. Now, the gold obviously was incredibly valuable, but it was one of various gold runs that the Soviets made in payment to the Americans, and what's more, it was insured against loss. So with the insurance paid out to the relevant parties, the Americans, with the loss of the gold in the Edinburgh, it was really added to the list of other regrettable losses amongst many. Now, that isn't to say that the British government wasn't interested in the HMS Edinburgh and made no attempts to recover it. From as early as 1954, there was various investigations done as to whether the Edinburgh was viable for salvage, but she lay at a depth that was far beyond the current technology of the day for salvage. They also didn't know exactly where she was, and what's more, and perhaps one of the biggest problems, is the fact that the gold that was insured, the gold that was on board, was insured 2/3 by the Soviet government and 1/3 by the British government. Now, this meant that by the time the remuneration had been paid out to the Americans, 2/3 of the gold thus still belonged to the Soviets and 1/3 belonged to the UK. Now, in 1954 and onwards, obviously, you're talking about the height of the Cold War, and even when it cooled off slightly or warmed up slightly, the uneasy tension between the British government and the Soviet government meant that trying to organise any form of joint operation to recover the gold was obviously never really going to work. None of that, however, dissuaded Keith Jessop, who enters the story as a very enterprising salvage diver. This is his autobiography of the account of the salvage of the HMS Edinburgh. And Keith Jessop is a fascinating character. He was a no-nonsense Yorkshire salvage diver who came from nothing and got a name for himself as a deep-sea diver and salvage diver. In fact, he actually got prosecuted for illegally salvaging a U-boat off the coast of Islay, which is a whole interesting story in and of itself. Now, Jessop became obsessed with the idea of salvaging the Edinburgh. He read one of the accounts, a Russian account of the sinking of the Edinburgh and the gold, and from as early as the 1960s became kind of captivated by this concept that he could salvage it and reclaim the gold of the Edinburgh. Now, by the 1970s, the price of gold was on the up, and the technology was there for better, more effective deep-sea dives and salvage, and a lot of interested parties were starting to look greedily at the Edinburgh, and someone who still had never given up on finding it was Keith Jessop. He had spent years researching the Edinburgh, interviewing survivors, poring over documents and logs from the German side and the British side and the Russian side, and he had actually unsuccessfully partnered with Stolt-Nielsen, which was a Norwegian company in 1979 to try and find the Edinburgh, and they were quite keen to go back and really find it this time without him. And Keith sort of realised that he needed to partner with some bigger fish, basically, so that he could make his pitch to the British government and get involved in any potential salvage.
Well, I've realised for quite a while that now we've pushed the barriers back and we can get divers down around the 1,000 feet mark, that Edinburgh is now readily available if we've put ourselves in a position where we can convince, i.e. the British government, the Russian government and the Salvage Association, that I can put forward the package that's required to get down there with safety, respect the war grave angle and bring back the cargo. I feel that at this point in time we can do that.
Forming a tiny startup company named Jessop Marine, the no-nonsense Yorkshire salvage diver used his expertise and contacts in the diving industry to form a consortium to bid for a contract from the British and Soviet government to salvage the gold. Perhaps most key to the enterprise were the established and successful diving company Wharton and Williams, or 2W, who would be the main organisers and managers of the venture, providing the divers, expertise and funding for the operation. The German Offshore Services Association, or OSA, would provide the ships needed for the venture. And finally, Recaldecca, leaders in the field of marine surveying, would provide the technology and research essential to both locating the ship that had long eluded Jessop's original search and then assessing the condition of the wreck for salvage. Jessop's consortium made a compelling bid, hoping to both undercut the competition in price but also win over the British government with their more precise plan of cutting into the ship's hull and extracting the gold with as little disturbance to the wreck as possible. In 1957, in a move done partially to protect the Edinburgh from unauthorised salvage, the ship had been designated an official war grave. As a result, more traditional forms of salvage, which usually involved blasting open sections of the wreck using explosives to recover valuables, would not be considered appropriate. The plan to dive on what was now an official war grave was still controversial, but the bold pitch worked, and both the British government and the Soviets agreed to award the contract to the consortium. In May 1981, almost 39 years after the Edinburgh sank, the consortium's meticulous research into the sinking and trying to narrow down the search areas for the wreck paid off. The OSA search vessel Damtor located the wreck of HMS Edinburgh, and for the first time since she sank in 1942, human eyes gazed on the 600-foot-long cruiser, now lying under some 840 feet of Arctic sea. The Edinburgh lay on her port side, with the gaping wounds made by the torpedo still clear to see. Incredibly though, she was still intact. Her enormously strong hull had held together after 4 torpedoes and a trip to the seabed, and it meant that the gold was probably still contained within the strengthened bomb room where it had first been stored. By August 1981, the Stephantium, one of the OSA's specialist diving vessels, set off packed with mountains of equipment needed for the operation and a crack team of some of the most experienced deep-sea divers in the world. They were facing a long and precarious salvage, Salvage, positioned above the wreck, 25 saturation divers who would need to remain in closed, pressurised conditions for the entire duration of the work would descend in alternating shifts onto the Edinburgh. The team had spent months researching every inch of the vessel, including visiting her sister, HMS Belfast, to research the best way of reaching the bomb room that contained the gold. The divers' plan was to pass through the huge torpedo hole on the exposed starboard side and into a void space originally designated to carry fuel. Once through this, they would then reach the wall of the bomb room where the gold had been stored and start to carefully cut through. As you can imagine, the entire operation carried tremendous levels of risk from every single angle. They were going to have to spend weeks working in some of the most turbulent stretches of sea found anywhere in the world, diving at depths that few, if anyone, had ever attempted before, and on a wreck of a World War II cruiser that was filled with tons of unexploded munitions, and all just for the chance of potentially recovering the gold that lay inside her. And of course, the entire time being watched by Soviet observers who they feared may at any point call in the authorities and confiscate everything they had recovered up to that point. Quite quickly, the team realised that their initial idea of accessing sections of the hull by passing through areas that the torpedoes had hit was never going to work. There was simply too much debris and detritus in the way that had either fallen down during the sinking or the battle in 1942. Instead, what they were faced with was cutting out sections of the undamaged armoured hull. Once this plating had been removed, they would be able to lift it away, move through this void space or fuel tank, and then cut through the bulkhead that would hopefully get them into the bomb room. It was going to be hard and relentless work for the divers, and they worked in pairs. A pressurised diving bell would be sent down with two members of the dive team inside it. One would come out and put in a 4-hour shift cutting and manoeuvring away sections of the hull. He would then go back into the diving bell to swap with his partner. He would come out and do his 4 hours, and then the two of them, when complete, would be lifted back up to the Stefantium, and a fresh pair of divers would be rotated in and travel down onto the wreck. Reading the accounts of this and seeing the footage of those divers working down there, I kept thinking about what it must have been like being there on the seabed of the Arctic Ocean, seeing a 40-year-old gigantic Royal Navy cruiser in front of you and digging through this strange otherworldly environment in the hope potentially of finding gold bars hidden within the wreck. And I thought to myself, well, why not ask a diver who was actually there?
Mike O'Meara is concerned about the condition of his divers.
My divers are pretty tired at the moment. I've got 6 working divers left out of potential of 8 at the moment. We had to decompress Dougie with his dislocated shoulder. They're pretty tired now.
Coming out of saturation is Keith Cooper with an ear infection, and Dougie Matheson, who, as well as dislocating his shoulder by a fall in the bell, has badly scalded feet.
The water had to be very hot to keep you warm, and when it went up 2 or 3 degrees, it just went from kind of being nice and comfortable to being scalding hot.
When I first heard that interview with Dougie Matheson, I thought, that guy sounds familiar. In fact, he sounds like somebody who is born and raised from the Highlands in and around me. And my hunch paid off, because I asked my dad, and my dad asked somebody else, and somebody else got back to him and said, oh yeah, I know Dougie, here's his phone number. And a couple of days ago, I called up Dougie Matheson, who's still in the industry, out on a ship in the North Sea as we speak, and asked him about the unique experience of diving on the Edinburgh and seeing that vast, gigantic cruiser sitting on the seabed for the first time. You know, I imagine you must have been one of the first people to see the ship for the first time, you know, since it had sunk back in 1942. And I just always thought, what an odd thing must have been standing, you know, stepping out the bell and then seeing this ship in front of you. And I just I thought it would be nice to hear your own words, what it was like actually experiencing that.
Spooky, very spooky. And I can clearly remember going along the top of the hull and looking over the side. The guns must have been at the lowest elevation when she went down with a list, you know. And there's the turret, the guns pointing straight at me, you know. You could see about fine. We didn't wander very far, you know. We could have stayed where we were working, like. So there's 2 of us would go down to the bell, and first diver would go out and do 4 hours and come back. We'd go out and do 4 hours. So it was normally about an 8-hour bell run. You know, we were complete. You'll hear me say in the video, and I still believe it, you know, we're about hot water burns and how hard it was and this, but just nothing compared. Went through in that Arctic Convoys.
I think the thing that brings it all to light is when we found when we were clearing debris to get into the bomb room. and found some human remains. It kind of brought all the suffering back to light that had gone on when the ship was sunk. And we were grumping and moaning about silly things like hot water and things like that, and how we were suffering doing the job, but it wasn't any of the suffering compared to what these men went through when the ship sunk.
It would be almost 2 weeks of relentless, round-the-clock cutting and working and removing debris from out of the way before they finally reached the bulkhead and were able to cut into the bomb room where the gold was held. But there was no immediate signs of the gold, just vast amounts of silt and more debris. They would have to further dig through it by hand. But on the 16th of September at around 11 p.m, Dougie and his dive partner were on the wreck when all of a sudden the fateful words that the entire team had been waiting to hear finally came in over the radio.
Christ, you didn't give me a heart attack, man, for Christ's sake. Where was it? Just lying there on its own, eh? Fantastic. You all right, Dougie?
Yes, aye. No, when you look at the video, you think it's me that found the first part, and then you see me getting my suit on in the chamber, and then going into the bell, and then getting dressed in, and then walking out the bell. Then the next thing is, I found the gold, but it was actually my bell partner that found the gold because of clever editing. It looks like it's me that found it, but...
well, I'm glad you're being honest. That's good. That's a good claim to fame. Incredibly, they had found their first gold bar exactly 4 months to the day since the Dam Tor had originally located the wreck of HMS Edinburgh. But the race was now truly on. It was the middle of September. They had to recover as much of the gold as possible before the bad weather closed in and forced them to abandon the site. By the 7th of October, with both the crew and the divers exhausted from the non-stop round-the-clock work and the bad weather closing in, the dives were called to an end. Amazingly, 431 gold bars out of a total of 465 had been recovered. 5 more bars had been found in the bomb room but left by the entranceway. There wasn't enough time to remove them before the dive was finished, but they knew that should they return in years to come, they'd be able to locate them pretty quickly. Not a bad haul. About £40 million worth of gold had been hauled up into the Stephantium. So with the dive out the way, now another precarious operation had to take place, a more politically precarious operation, because now the Stephantium, loaded with over £40 million worth of gold, that's about £150 million worth of gold in today's money, it now had to travel to Murmansk. And of course, ironically, that's where the gold had left from originally in 1942 on the Edinburgh. It was returning back home, but only a portion of it. So remember, in the total value of the gold, 2/3 is owned by the Soviets, 1/3 is owned by the British government. But the terms of the salvage was that out of the total salvage, the consortium kept 45%. Now, in her article, HMS Edinburgh and Her Cargo of Gold by Michelle Blagg, she breaks down how it worked for the consortium. The Salvage share was subdivided in accordance with their shares. 2W 37.12%, Jessop Marine 10%, OSA 50.4%, and Reykjavik 2.48%. But whatever way you cut the gold, a pretty amazing payday for everyone involved, and you would think everyone would walk away from the entire affair pretty happy. I mean, after all, they had achieved a record-setting salvage, recovering more gold and more valuables than any other salvage probably in history. They had done it at deeper depths than anyone had ever dived, and they'd also done it in a way that didn't disturb the Edinburgh as a war grave. Keith Jessop's meticulous research and his years of work bidding to get this salvage off the ground had finally paid off. He was an instant millionaire. 2W had proved themselves to be top of the game in the industry yet again, and even for the British and Soviet governments, they had both walked away with a pretty handy profit. But from the moment the Stephantium arrived back home in the UK, things got very complicated. Now, this is a really weird part of the story, but it's worth addressing because of the very real effects that it had for the people involved. Essentially, Keith Jessop, when he came on board the Stephantium for the expedition, was not there in any official role. He was there basically as an honorary guest on board during the actual dive. He obviously didn't take part in any of the dives themselves. And he took with him a film crew who filmed the documentary, but also a reporter who had exclusive rights to publish the story of the salvage operation in the Sunday Sunday Times. Now, this reporter, in the midst of the actual dive, sent reports back to the Sunday Times and published articles that claimed falsely that the divers on board the ship, while they had been salvaging the Edinburgh, had been interfering and messing around with and desecrating remains that were found inside the ship. But the story goes further than that. Barry Penrose was the name of the journalist who was on board the Stephantium and had published these claims. And when Barry Penrose returned back on the Stephantium with the rest of the crew, he went on to write this book, Stalin's Gold, HMS Edinburgh and its treasure. Now, not only in Stalin's Gold does Barry Penrose repeat the claims of desecration, but he also goes one further. He alleges that the only reason the consortium ever won the contract was due to the fact that Keith Jessop had bribed members and officials in the government and the Salvage Association to give him and the consortium the contract to salvage the Edinburgh. Now, Keith Jessop took him to court over this, and the court ruled that Barry Penrose was lying. This book was libelous, and as a result, the book was ordered to be pulped. This one's actually an American copy, and I do wonder whether maybe the order to pulp them didn't reach America. Now, the reason I bring this up now is this had a real tangible effect on the people involved in the salvage. Dougie Matheson had to go back home and face up to people who thought that he had desecrated a war grave, desecrated a ship that had been crewed by people in the local community.
Oh, I know, and I'm telling you what, Callum, it was terrible because we got back and my dad had a pub in Ullapool, and I can remember on the Sunday morning going down and my father was there with a face like thunder, and he said, Did you defamate that war grave? You've been disrespectful to these sailors, and we were not. So it's 40 years now since the job, and a wee while ago, the journalist actually from the Times, he got in contact to do an article for the 40 years thing, and I said to him, the only way I'm going to say anything is if you please say something at the end of what said about the defamation of war graves was absolute rubbish.
Now, there is one final twist to this story of the HMS Edinburgh, and it's to do with the remaining gold bars that were left in the wreck, because remember, they were only able to recover 431. 34 gold bars were left behind, and 5 of those gold bars were found and then stacked near the entrance of the bomb room to make it easier for the next team to come back and basically reclaim them. Now, in 1986, 2W, Wharton and Williams on their own managed to convince the British government to let them go back and do this salvage operation again. It would be a little bit more streamlined this time, and also it would be taking place with a brand new crew and a brand new dive team, so none of the original members would be coming back, and Keith Jessop was not involved with this either. Now, when they dived on the wreck, they noticed that an underwater camera that they had left behind back in 1981 was no longer there. And interestingly, when they entered the bomb room, the 5 gold bars that were stacked right at the entrance were no longer there. Now, they did the entire dive operation and they managed to recover the 29 remaining gold bars. But 5 of them, and specifically those 5 that were left at the entrance to the bomb room, were nowhere to be seen. Now, this is where I'll leave the story with you. I would recommend going and reading Rick Wharton's book, Salvage of the Century. He maintains that perhaps the Soviets had dived on the wreck, recovered those 5 gold bars, the easiest bars to find. Perhaps it was somebody involved in the second dive that had maybe coordinated something or organised something to secret away those 5 gold bars, never to be seen again. All I know is, and all we know is, out of all those 465 gold bars, 5 of them are still not accounted for. But the one place they aren't is in the wreck of HMS Edinburgh. So yes, the HMS Edinburgh and the salvage of the century. I mean, I think having it now being 1:30 in the morning and me still trying to get this video finished and edited has proven to me how big of a subject this is and how much it is outside of the scope of what is one short YouTube documentary. Look, if you are interested in this topic, there are, well, a stack of books that you can see in front of me here. I'm actually going to do something as well in the description underneath the sponsor, which is Surfshark. Thanks again, guys. You'll find in there a link to my website. I have so many books that you can imagine that build up after projects, and I'm going to try and contribute to getting more books back out into circulation. So if you go to my website, I will at the very least have one of these for sale, because I actually have like 3 or 4 of these. I don't know why. This is my favourite book on the story of HMS Edinburgh, and it's called Last Call for HMS Edinburgh, a story of the Russian convoys. It's a very short book that tells the story of Edinburgh's final battle, but it goes into a lot of detail about stuff that I obviously wasn't able to cover. The other 2 books, I would say, if you want to know about the salvage of HMS Edinburgh, Salvage of the Century by Rick Wharton. I don't have it here, I've got it on Kindle. Is an amazing book. Rick Wharton, remember, was the kind of co-founder owner of 2W, the main organisers, managers, and financiers of the Salvage, and he goes into so much detail and the technical nature of the Salvage, more so than what Keith Jessop is able to cover in Goldfinder. Because remember, Keith Jessop wasn't actively involved in the Salvage in that regard by that point. He was, doing the research and pitching to form the consortium in the years previously. But his book, Goldfinder, is fantastic because it really, it lets you into the mind a lot more of Keith Jessop. And I mean, it is remarkable, this just fanatical drive that he had towards the salvage of this ship. And, it makes that moment on deck that you can see in that amazing documentary, which is quite hard to find. I've only ever seen a few copies poorly uploaded to YouTube of it, but you can see that moment when he's on the ship and he sees that first bar of gold, what it must have been like, and you can get a better understanding of that in this. I think that's everything. I think I've managed to cover it all. Really enjoyed this. Thanks again to my patrons, as always, for supporting what I do. But this month has been a little bit unusual. My grandfather, also called Callum, passed away. He was 95 years old, so a pretty good age. He and very healthy up until the very end, and completely sharp and full of stories and everything that you would want from a grandfather, or a shenner as we call him. That's the word in Gaelic. And the thing that I'm going to miss the most is he was the best hype man you could ever have for a YouTube channel, despite the fact that he had no idea what YouTube was. I think around 1995 he basically was like, I don't want to know any more about technology, like that is it. I'm done. I've learned how a tape player works. I could turn on the radio, I'm fine. I could probably, build an entire house in an afternoon, but I'm not going to learn how a mobile phone works. But despite that, I would go in every time I published a video, or, every morning that I popped in or whatever. He'd ask about the channel or the videos or the films. He didn't really know exactly how they worked or how I made them or what, but he enjoyed watching them. And then I would sit there and tell him, 20,000 people have watched. 5 million people have watched this video. I've made a video about your grandfather's knife and 20,000 people have watched it. And he would be, you'd literally see his mind blown. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye-bye.